like it's just about time for Monster Monday. I'll go ahead and get the pre-show music off, and then we will come back over here and we will kick off the show. Hello, welcome everybody to Monster Monday. I am your host, DM Gallibond. In the pre-show, you've been listening to several selections by Kevin MacLeod. You can find all of his music over at incompetech.com. You can also find a good chunk of his music built into the Roll20 music jukebox library. And that's where all these selections come from. It's straight out of Roll20. So if you get an account for Roll20, you can go over there and you can listen to all of that stuff as well. All right. Today is Monday, the 11th of May. I hope all the moms out there had a great Mother's Day yesterday. And tonight we are going to talk a little bit about the Boros Challenger. But before we get into that, I want to remind everybody, if you like what we're doing here on the Twitch channel, give us a follow. And that'll let you know every time we go live and have some new content out for you. We do 2 actual play games every week, and in fact this monster is tied into one of those, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. And I also stream, obviously, this Monster Monday. Then you'll find out more information over in the credits at the end of this stream. You'll find out things about my YouTube channel and some of my other social media accounts, how you can follow me online and all that kind of stuff. And as always, we want to start off by sending a big thank you out to Mo over at the tabletopbellhop.com. If you are a tabletop gamer, whether your jam is card games, board games, RPG games, whatever it is, go over to the tabletopbellhop.com, and Mo is the OG when it comes to everything about your tabletop gaming needs. All right, and without further ado, let's talk a little bit about this Boros Challenger. Now, those who have followed this show for a while or who have been back through some of the archives, you know that normally what we do is we focus on a creature out of D&D lore. But as you'll see, the Boros Challenger is a creature from Magic the Gathering. Why is that? Well, that has to do with my Sunday actual play campaign that I run on Twitch and Roll20, which is the Walker of Waterdeep, where we cross the streams of lore between D&D 5e and Magic the Gathering. So, Boros Challenger is a creature that came out in the Guilds of Ravnica expansion in 2018. And this is a human soldier from the Boros Legion. And when the PCs in my Walker of Waterdeep campaign went to Ravnica as part of their ongoing quest, they faced this monster along with several other Boros Legion monsters in an arena fight, basically where the Ravnicans were trying to test just how tough these adventurers from what Ravnicans considered the backwater planet of Toril, or the backwater world of Toril, which is where Waterdeep is, where they had come from. Now you notice there's a couple of these abilities down here on this card, and when I converted the card over to a monster for Dungeons and Dragons, I was able to take one of those abilities. I kind of felt like with the encounter I set up, taking both of them would be a bit of overkill, but I'm going to talk about how you might do that a little bit later on in this show. All right. So what about the monster lore for the Boros Challenger? As a member of the Legion, the Boros Challenger believes in the purpose of the Legion above all else. Now, an interesting thing about the Guilds of Ravnica expansion for Magic the Gathering is that it came out on exactly the same day as the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica sourcebook came out for D&D. So they very much anticipated that there was a lot of people like me who, since the mid 90s, have kind of thought about, wow, wouldn't it be cool to see some of these monsters out of Magic the Gathering in a D&D campaign or in a D&D setting. And so they've started to try to open the doors to that a little bit. Um, I was a bit disappointed with the way they've done that, and you'll see that when it comes to my homebrew version of the Boros Challenger. So here's one of the quotes out of that Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, where it talks about sort of the philosophy of the Boros Legion. We soldiers of the Boros Legion humbly take up steel against the corruption and lawlessness that grow at the soul of Ravnica. Combining the force of law with the military strength to back it up, we work to forge Ravnica into a just society, a safe and healthy community for all. Doesn't it just tug at your heartstrings when you hear that? All right, so now what kind of creature is the Boros Challenger? Now, you'll know if you studied a little bit about the Monster Manual or you paid much attention to D&D Beyond, you'll know that every creature in uh, D&D has a creature type. And that gives you a little bit of the ground rules or the template of what the creature is going to have. So humanoids are the main peoples in the D&D world, both civilized and savage, including humans and a tremendous amount of other species. They have languages and cultures, few if any innate magical abilities, although most humanoids can learn spellcasting, and they're generally bipedal in form. Uh, Most common humanoid races are the ones that are most suitable as player characters. And so, you go through that player's handbook, and all of the races that you can play as player characters are there. And obviously, as every edition of D&D matures, and 5th edition is now, it came out in the fall of 2014, so this fall it'll be 6 years old, which is about, you know, depending on the editions over the years, that's been somewhere between the halfway point in the lifespan of an edition, or perhaps maybe a little bit beyond the halfway point in the lifespan. So you can expect that it will fully mature by 8 or 10 years, and then by then you'll be hearing a lot of rumblings, if not before then, you'll be hearing a lot of rumblings about the advent of 6th edition, or whatever they're going to call the next edition of D&D. All right. So terrain, where are you going to find it? Well, anything you find in Boros is almost always going to be urban. Now, will be some exceptions we'll talk about in a few weeks when we get to some of the Gruul clans. But Ravnica is it's a civilization that pretty much is a planet-sized city. The entire plane, if you will, is a city except for the parts of it that are wastelands outside the city. And so anybody that is part of the guilds, again, aside from the Gruul clans who live outside of the civilized areas, they're going to be an urban habitat. So most Ravnican monsters are denizens, and the Boros Legion are no exceptions. All right, so what about the flavor features? What are the flavor features of this creature? And this is just because everything about the monster is so tied up into its allegiance with the Boros Legion. Really, the best place to look is more of the philosophy and ideology, if you will, of the Boros. So, wherever criminals exploit others, petty tyrants make grabs for power, or violence erupts and leaves devastation, we Boros soldiers are there fighting to make things right. And the Legion stands for peace and justice, which can be established only through the rule of law. Our moral stance is unquestionable as we strive to protect the innocent and powerless from oppression and exploitation. Oh, those words. They're so heartening. All right, now we get to the good stuff, the mechanical features. So, looking at the Boros Challenger, not in Magic the Gathering, but first looking at it in D&D. So what makes this monster tick? Now this is a totally homebrew take on it. The way I created this creature is probably not the way it would be created in the halls of the D&D offices out in Renton, Washington. But I decided that the Boros Challenger would be a CR5 monster. It gets 2 attacks per round, and it has plus 10 for each attack. It wears splint mail and a shield, so it has AC 19. It has 82 hit points. And you might say, wow, that sounds a little high for a CR5. And yeah, it is a little high, but that's because it's for my particular game, and it's the way I need it to be for my particular players. So the damage dice are D8s. The stat block is 18, 14, 16, 12, 13, 14, and that stat block is based on the Bugbear Chief from D&D 5e. Now, if you go and you look at that, you'll see that those scores aren't lined up exactly the same way that the Bugbear Chief is lined up. But what I try to do is I try to take a template of something. So, okay, I have a humanoid. So then I go and I look at humanoids that are close to the same CR. And I say, okay, in the artwork, how is this creature depicted in Magic? Is it an armored creature? Is it unarmored? Is it a caster? Is it melee? What is it doing? And then I look for something that has those similar abilities over on D&D. And I take things like the CR rating, the uh, the ability scores, and the armor class, and I usually will pull those over, and I might rearrange some scores just to fit my needs a little bit better, or I might tweak the scores a little, maybe raise a score here, lower a score there. So this monster also reflects some of the powerful abilities of the monster in the Magic the Gathering game. As we'll see, I added a feature to mimic the Mentor ability printed on the card. Now, one thing I didn't add was the ability to add mana to pump up the power and toughness of the creature. Now, if we go back a few slides here, you'll see that this card in the Magic game has the ability, if you pay 4 mana, 2 of any color, 1 has to be red, 1 has to be white, the Boros Challenger gets +1/+1 until the end of the turn. Okay. I had this creature be part of a group that my party was fighting, and if I had these guys being able to, instead of being CR5, if they could pump up in the battle to be effectively like CR6 or CR7, that would just unbalance the fight too much. And it would be really too hard to track in terms of, everything going on and keeping the fight at the level that I wanted. So I said, okay, I'm going to toss that out. But I did create something for the mentor, and we will see that when we get a little bit farther into the slideshow. All right, so let's look at those attacks. We said it gets 2 attacks, and it makes 2 attacks with a longsword. And a longsword is +10 to hit, melee weapon attack, reach 5 feet, and it deals, just like a longsword, 1d8 plus strength damage. So it's 1d8 plus 4 strength damage that it deals. Now, in the conversion algorithm, I use the monster's power to determine its number of attacks. And so since the Boros Challenger is a power 2 toughness 3, then that means that the Challenger gets 2 attacks every round. And the +10 attack bonus is based on the fact that the PCs in my game have a high AC curve. Now I have a barbarian who, like most barbarians, doesn't wear armor, but because of some of the feats he's taken and because of some of the abilities he has, he walks around with like a 17 or 18 AC. And then we have my Warforged cleric, who is on the high end, and he has a 24 AC. So if I don't give the monsters they face a high two hit bonus, then the monsters are just going to sit there and fan with their weapons a lot of times. And I don't want that to happen. I want to put some fear into my players that um, a high armor class isn't necessarily going to prevent them from getting hit. But at the same time, you notice I didn't give this guy a gaudy amount of damage for hits because I usually will have my party facing an overloaded field on the other side. So if there's 5 people in the party, they may be facing 7, 8, 9 monsters in an encounter, and that is because uh, you know they've got a big array of abilities the party does that they can use either to mitigate damage or to take enemies out of the fight or whatever. They have a lot of things they can do, but because there are so many of them and because initiatives may go that all the monsters go before they get to do anything, I don't want to have a case where the monsters come in and just mop the floor with the party before they have a chance to do anything. So it's a balance. You know, the they will have a fairly decent likelihood to hit, but it's not going to be a devastating hit with every attack. When I swarm my players with enemies. All right, so let's take a look at some of the special abilities. Now, notice this is a straight up fighter, but he has damage immunity to fire and cold, and he has damage resistance to thunder and radiant. Then he also has a field command ability, and this is the one that mimics that mentor ability. So as a bonus action, the Boros Challenger can target an ally of a lesser CR that it can see, and it can give that targeted ally advantage on their attacks until the end of the Boros Challenger's next turn. And if you have played much of Magic the Gathering, you will know that when you're building a deck, one of the things you look for is you look for synergies. You say, okay, well, if I put this card in my deck, and then I put these cards in my deck, then something that this card does will make these cards work better. Or these cards also have ability that makes this card work better. And so that's what I try to do when I build an encounter for my players to face, is that they will realize that, oh crap, the thing that this enemy is doing is helping out those enemies, and those enemies are then in turn making that enemy more effective. And so it gives them again that feeling like they have really stepped into a Magic the Gathering game as their D&D characters. So let's get back to that immunity and resistance. In my campaign, that immunity and resistance is based on the color of the mana used to cast the creature. Now, red is keyed to the energy sources of fire and thunder, while white is keyed to the energy sources of cold and radiant. Now, is that written down anywhere? Did somebody dictate that? No. I had to go and I had to make up a matrix for myself when I started this campaign, and I said, okay, we have um, red, white, green, black, and blue mana. And then a few years ago, they actually came up with a symbol for colorless mana. So, all right, so now you have 6 different uh, types of mana, 6 different colors of mana, if you will. And then you have a whole bunch of different energy sources over in D&D. So you've got things like cold, fire, lightning, acid, yada yada, radiant, necrotic, blah blah blah, all these types of things. So then I had to figure out for each color what are they aligned to? And because they don't line up exactly one to one, I just said, all right, look, every color in Magic the Gathering is going to be related to two colors in D&D. It doesn't make everything work out really nice. Some get a little bit more used than others, but what are you gonna do? And it's like I could do that whole thing where you make it multiples of something, but then that's just too much stuff to keep track of. So I just said, all right, I'm gonna keep it simple. One color mana equals two different energy types, and so when a creature has a certain mana color tied to it, then that means that it will almost always get either an immunity or a resistance to one of the associated energy types. And then if it has any special spell-like abilities, usually those abilities will be keyed to the energy type that is associated with the mana used to cast the card. All right, and then that field command ability um, gives the lower level things advantage on their attacks. So that's just like this guy making those other minions a little bit stronger. All right, so now what about this card back in Magic the Gathering? Uh, I mentioned before that I first started playing Magic uh, really kind of probably the same year that it came out. I think it came out in 1993, and I believe it was before the end of 1993 that my friends and I, who had been playing D&D by then for a decade or more, we found the cards, when they started coming into the hobby shops, and we started buying some and we started putting decks together. And I've always loved that game, and I've loved the artwork, and I've loved everything about it, but I've never been much of a strategist, and I've never been a great deck builder. So I call myself an enthusiast of the game. I am nowhere near like an expert on the game. So instead, what I'm doing in this area is I'm just giving you a few little bits of trivia about each of these cards. So Barging Sergeant came out in, I'm sorry, not Barging Sergeant. We're doing Boros Challenger. Came out in 2018 in the Guilds of Ravnica set, and it was an uncommon card. So the artwork is by Gabor Sikzai. Um, I guess that's Eastern European or something like that. It was one of 143 creatures in that set, one of 18 cards that required both red and white mana to cast, one of 66 cards costing 2 mana to cast, and one of 25 cards in the set bearing the Boros Legion guild mark. And the Boros Challenger is also one of 411 cards across all the expansions to have either the words human or to have the words. No, I'm sorry. I didn't edit that well. Um, 411 cards across all the expansions to have the words human and soldier as part of the subtype of the card. So if you look through the entire history, you'll find 411 different human soldier cards as subtypes in Magic the Gathering. So now, how did I use this in my Walker of Waterdeep campaign? So in that campaign, I alluded to it earlier, I had the Boros Legion, Azoria Senate, and Izzet League allied in common cause that led them to send envoys to Waterdeep where my party met them. After a little bit of a rocky start, the PCs were eventually chosen as ambassadors from Toril to Ravnica, and the Boros set up a sparring challenge to try to impress these country bumpkins from the primitive backwater plain of Toril. And the Boros Challenger was part of the opponents that the party faced, which included a blade instructor and several fresh-faced recruits, and all of them were led by a barging sergeant. And of course, any of those can benefit from the sergeant's field command ability. And of course, as you saw, I also gave field command to the challenger, and I also gave it to the blade instructor. So these fresh-faced recruits could get basically advantage from all three of the other higher level cards, but then the barging sergeant could give advantage to either the blade instructor or to the Boros Challenger or to the fresh-faced recruits. So that was one of the things that I did to kind of play around with my party and give them a sense that, oh wow, okay, so these guys are all really tough because they all can get advantage on their attacks. And so that helped to give that idea of this group of enemies they were fighting were working synergistically in the way that cards in a deck of Magic the Gathering would work together as well. All right. And let's see. Okay, yeah, it looks like we do have a viewer on the chat. Viewer, you have any questions about tonight's monster or anything that came about from our discussion? What that you would like to know more about? Okay, well, hearing none, I'm going to go ahead into the wrap up then. And thank you guys for either watching on the stream or coming back during the week and watching a little bit later. I have been your host, DM Gallibond. You can catch my Monster Monday show every night at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can also watch my Walker of Waterdeep actual play game where some of these monsters get used on Sundays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. And then you can watch my Dragon of Icespire Peak game, which is the Essentials game, on Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can follow all of the stuff I stream live on Twitch at twitch.tv/Gallibond. You can find my pre-recorded short little videos that I do every day of the week over on YouTube at my YouTube channel there. And then you can find, if you like what we do and you would like to support and help us do more and create more content, we do have a Patreon set up. But would love it that if on YouTube, if you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so that you'll know when we have new content going live. Here on Twitch, if you would go ahead and give us a follow or subscribe if you really feel so inclined. And also, I welcome anybody that wants to put me in their auto host list so that if you're not doing anything at a time that I'm on and you want activity on your channel, please feel free to add me to your auto host list. I have, met a bunch of other very cool D&D DMs that way by going out and looking to see who else is streaming D&D at times that I am not streaming content, and I've added them to the auto host list so that if you drop by my channel and I'm not live, there's a good chance that you'll see somebody else's game that I am hosting. And you can either sit on my channel and watch, or you can click through and go directly to their channel and give them a watch. All right, well, thank you so much. That's going to do it for this Monster Monday. I still see no questions on the chat. So I will go ahead and close us out in the same way that I always do by just saying, watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everybody.